Welcome to another video. This is about relationships between species. We have a lot to cover here. Let's go. All right, so when we're talking about how species relate, the most important piece that we need to discuss is something called their niche, because every organism has a different niche. This niche is the role that they play in the ecosystem. It could be what they eat, it could be where they live, it could be how they interact, it could be a relationship they have with other species or other organisms. And all of that kind of dictates their survival and how the ecosystem works together. So we're going to look at some examples here. So this is a bird called the jacana, and this jacana bird is known for its really big webbed feet. It actually lives on lily pads and is able to flip over these lily pads in order to get to the crustaceans below. So it has carved out its own niche. There's very few organisms that can live on top of these lily pads like the jacana can. And so it's developed this very unique niche to differentiate it from all the other organisms in the community. Now, this is different from a heron. The heron lives in very similar waters, but because of its very long legs, it can go a lot deeper in the water. So it can catch a different variety of food than the jacana that we were looking at before. So they're not going to eat the same thing, and so their niches are different. Now, comparing the heron with this next one called the spoonbill, these ones live in almost the exact same environment. They're both found here in Korea. If you're interested, Miss Surratt in middle school loves finding these birds. But they have very different niches. If you notice, the heron has that long beak and the very long legs, where the spoonbill has this round beak here. And the round beak here allows it to eat crustaceans, where the heron is more focused on little fish instead of the spoonbill, which is going to focus really on those crustaceans. So they're able to live in the same habitat, the same environment, the same waters, but they're feeding on different things. Now, a very important principle for the AP exam is something called the competitive exclusion principle. This is a principle that reminds us that no two species can occupy the same niche in an ecosystem. If they do, they will endure competition. When these two species try to share the same niche, one will always outcompete and always win. So here's an example here. These are two different bacteria. And in this first top graph here, you can see this is when they're grown in two separate cultures, so they're not interacting with each other. However, in the graph below, this is when they're grown in the same, they're mixed together. And you can see that within 24 days, this bacteria here has gone almost non-existent because they were not able to compete together. One of them is always going to win. They were not able to have the same niche. Now, there is a workaround, and we have discovered that if we try to take two species that occupy the same niche, as we mentioned before, one of them will be out-competed. So this is a paramecium, and if I place these two parameciums in the same container, only this blue one will survive, and this is due to the competitive exclusion principle. However, if I'm able to partition a difference between them, so put in the blue one first, and then maybe put the pink one in separate on top, I'm able to create a distinct boundary between the two. And when we do that, that is an example of this resource partitioning, where this paramecium can eat all the food in this half of the container, and this paramecium can eat all the food in this half of the container, and they can both survive. So this is a very important one. Resource partitioning is a way that we can have two species with the same niche both survive. Another example of this is time. So we can have resource partitioning involve time or it can involve position or area. So when we're talking about time, think about like an amusement park. If you have fast pass, you can go ahead of everybody else. Or if you have a morning pass, you can go ahead of everybody else. And those can coexist at the same time. Or if you all try to go at the exact same time, you know we're going to have extreme lines and people are going to give up. So these birds and the swallows and the bats are an example of this. The swallows are going to hunt during the day. The bats are going to hunt at night. They're hunting the exact same thing. They have the exact same niche, but these niches are happening at different times throughout the day. We could also do this with space, as I mentioned before. So it could be in a forest, it could be an aquatic ecosystem. Kind of think bunk beds. Somebody's occupying the top bed, somebody else is occupying the bottom bed. So this is an example of the resource partitioning in terms of space. Is inhabiting the lower part of the tree, while the yellow bird is going to inhabit the top part of the tree, and our red bird is in between. So again, all three of these have the exact same niches, but they've been able to coexist due to this resource partitioning. This is another example where consider it is kind of the same habitat, a little bit different. But I have flamingos with the long legs who can go a lot deeper. Ducks can dive down, so they're going to go a little bit more shallow. Then I have the avocets, then my oyster catchers, and then the plovers. So each one can occupy kind of a different space, allowing them to have the same niche. Now, what we've realized, though, is that due to competition, an organism may have its fundamental niche. This is the niche it would play if there was no competition. But most of the time, organisms are going to have a realized niche. And this is the role that it actually plays due to limitation. So here's an example for you. These are called, we had to look this one up, this is called the thalamus. And these thalamus muscles, what they're going to do is if they had their fundamental niche, they would have all this room. They would enjoy so much of it. However, when the semibalanus comes along and there's competition, their niche is going to be much smaller because of the competition due to the semibalanus species. This is another example of the resource partitioning where they're able to kind of partition out that resource so that both can survive. Now, we're going to take a risk, kind of stop there, and now we're going to move into symbiosis and different relationships between species. So there are so many different relationships between species. Some are beneficial to both, some are harmful to both, and some are neutral. If it's beneficial, we're going to call it a positive. If it's harmful, we're going to give it a negative. Or if it's neutral, if it doesn't really affect the species, we're going to give it a 0. Obviously, in this situation here, the cheetah is gaining from this as food, as it's getting food, and the gazelle is a negative effect on the gazelle. Okay, we've got 6 different types of these relationship. Let me move this guy. Of these relationships between species. Let's look at them. Competition is our first one. Obviously, for this monkey here, if this other monkey was not there, it would be much more beneficial to this one. It would have much more area to roam, to reproduce, to feed on, but now it's having to compete with the other species. So therefore, anytime we have competition, when we're competing for the same resource, whether it's housing or whether it's food, it's going to be a negative to both. Then we have predation. This one's kind of obvious, where it's a predator-prey relationship. One of them is going to gain food, one of them is going to lose its life. So positive, negative there. And herbivory, this is one that's often forgotten. Herbivores are so important to the ecosystem because they're going to gain all of that energy out of the producers through the rest of the community. However, this grazing is going to shape this ecosystem. It's going to suppress the amount of producers. So it's a positive, obviously, for our consumers. It's a negative for the producers because sometimes we can have overgrazing. That's really going to suppress that growth and distribution of the plants below. All right, then we have symbiosis. Symbiosis, these are ecological interactions between two species where one is dependent on the others for survival. The most important part about symbiosis that's a little bit different from what we looked at before is that it implies a persistent state of either contact or proximity. So these things are living very close to each other so that one species can be dependent upon the other. All right, we're going to look at mutualism first. Mutualism is where both of them benefit. So some examples for you. Pollinators, we have plants, and these plants need to be pollinated. Our bees, our birds, etc., they need pollen, they need food. So it's a combination here where our plants are producing food in the form of nectar for our pollinators, and our bees and birds, they're going to carry the pollen from one plant to the other. So both are benefiting from this situation. Ants are another example. Ants carry aphids to new feeding locations, and they kind of defend these things from predators. In return, those aphids are going to produce a nectar-like substance, kind of like they call it a honeydew, that's going to provide food for the ants. So the ants are going to receive this food while the aphids receive that protection and the movement. Oxpeckers, they're going to eat the ticks. So these little guys here, they're going to eat the ticks that live on these grazing animals. In return, these grazing animals are going to provide food for the birds while riding them. So a nice little situation there. The oxpeckers get the food while the grazing animals have all their ticks removed, which is really nice. Ugh, ticks are gross. Ugh. Now this is a favorite, a good old Finding Nemo relationship where we have the sea anemones and we have the clownfish. Sea anemones are quite poisonous with their venom, so they can eat different species by killing them with the venom. So what the clownfish do is that they act as a bait, attracting other fish species into the sea anemone so it can eat it and kill those other fish species. In return, the clownfish get protection and kind of a home from the anemone. So a nice little symbiosis relationship here, mutualism. This is my commensalism dog here who's not willing to participate in my video. Geneva, say hi. Geneva, you have to say hi to them. Oh, you gonna say hi? Yeah. So my little version of commensalism who she is hooked on me, but doesn't bother me at all. There we go. I'll see you guys later in class. My lazy bum here. Huh? Can you say hi? An example of commensalism here? Huh? You gonna say hi? No, you're just gonna lay here, nice and lazy. Huh? Can you say hi at all?